following program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.
I'm Carl Seidel. I'm a representative from Ward 1. I also serve on the Public Works and Highways Department. On my... Can't hear me?
No, somebody was talking.
Oh, okay. On my right is Senator Kevin Avard. You want to say what committees you're on?
Yeah, do I have to stand?
No, well, go
Why don't you sit down? You're
All
making
right.
me nervous. Kevin Avard, I'm your Senator, District 12. I serve on the Education Committee, the Health and Human Services. I serve also on Rules and Internal Affairs, as well as JELCAR. So there's 4 committees, and then, of course, I'm appointed to a number of other appointments, which we keep busy.
Because there are only 24 of them, he has to triple his work.
Yeah, we're up there 5 days a week.
Okay, Eric Eastman.
It's with great pride and humility that I introduce myself to my constituents for the first time. Eric Robert Eastman. I'm one of your freshman state rep. I'm very happy to be thus. I serve on state and federal relations as well as Veterans Affairs. It's an excellent committee. It's the committee that communicates directly with Congress, as a matter of fact. Some of the resolutions sometimes that come out of our committee and make it past the House floor go straight to Congress. So that's a heady responsibility. I was also recently appointed to the New Hampshire Commission on Media Development and Motion Picture Industry.
And on my left, Elizabeth Ferreira.
Hello. Can you all hear me? I also am very happy to be here. This is my first term, and I'm still learning a lot. I'm on children and family law, and that has been an eye-opener, and there's much to be learned. One of the things that we are working on in that committee right now is looking at alimony reform, and we may be looking a bit to Massachusetts, to the changes that they made about 3 years ago, and how that's been considered an improvement to the system as far as having better outcomes for, or I should say, clearer outcomes for what to expect when people go before the alimony court. So that's all. Yeah.
We're happy to have you here. We hope to have another meeting sometime in June, which will update you on the legislation that will be coming out of the Senate and probably be in committee of conference on a number of issues. What I'd like to do tonight is just review the process a little bit, just so you, some of you who may not be familiar with the process up there. The whole budget gets started at the end of a year when the agencies get together and put their assessments of what they need for the following year together. The governor then talks with the agencies. The agencies had requested a $2 billion increase in expenditures. The governor cut that down to only $1.1 billion in her package that she gave to the House in mid-February. The House then looked at it a little differently. They found out what they believed to be the best estimate for income, and then matched the expenses to what they felt was the maximum income that they could anticipate for the coming fiscal biennium. That went through, and that had to be turned over to the Senate at the end of March. There were a number of changes. We went into a caucus, the House Republicans did, and we looked at what the proposal was, and there were a couple of things that we really didn't care for. One of them was the money that was going back to the cities and towns for their educational support. And that was changed when by an amendment on the floor. There are several other changes that came in where we moved some money around so that we could do as much as possible with the funds that we had. So that now goes to the Senate. The Senate has to turn it back to their perspective at the beginning of June. And if there are major differences, it'll go to a committee of conference, and we all have to finish with something that we can agree with, and by the end of June, so that the governor can either sign it or not sign it or veto it. And if there's a veto, then we have to come back and see whether we agree with the veto or and override it, or override the veto. If we don't agree, we may be in session during the summer, because we do have to pass a budget. A default budget goes into place temporarily. We will, I don't know, Kevin, did you want to say anything about what the Senate?
Well, with the budget is concerned, I don't sit on finance or anything of that nature, and we're still waiting for the numbers to come in. That's one of the benefits of being in the Senate. We'll actually have a more accurate picture of the finances that did come in, and we'll be able to construct around that. I don't doubt that we'll probably end up going to a committee of conference, just because there might be some major differences between the House and the Senate as well. We don't want to raid any funds. All designated funds will, I'm not going to say they are off limits, but that seems to be the sentiment, that we want to make sure that funds that are appropriated go to where they were appropriated. And we don't want to raid any funds to that effect. But right now, it's still premature for the Senate to comment on the budget, being 2 weeks into it in a day. So if you have any questions, maybe in June, we can get into that in a little bit more detail.
There's a budget overview paper that the House Majority Office turned out. And you can see from that, they're on the side tables. And by the way, if there's anything you want to get on a distribution list or something, put your name and email down on the papers on the side, and we will keep you informed by email. We try to get publicity out on this. We sent a public press release, and only one paper picked it up. We work with Channel 96 too. If you're not familiar with it on Comcast Cable, that's the public access channel. I have a show called People's View. Kevin has a show called
Gate City Chronicles and Speak Up and Talk with the Senator.
So we try to talk about current things, and along with the political issues. We interview some of the people, the aldermen, the mayor, as well as some of the statewide officials. But getting back to the budget, we turned out $11.2 billion budget. Now, as you know, a lot of our budget comes from the federal government. So of that 11.2, I think for the general funds, it's $2.7 billion. Is the ones that we pay with the taxes and fees from the state. The House budget spends $362 million more than the current budget. So there weren't cuts from the current budget. There were an increase of essentially a little over 3%. We will well, we'll take questions. I guess we might as well just go right to questions and see what you have. Yes?
I was really disappointed that dedicated funds are being raided, especially by Republicans, since I've always heard Republicans tell me, never raid dedicated funds. It's happened in the past, it happens always, but this time it seems pretty...
Excuse me for a minute. He's telling me that we can't hear you on the tape. If you would come down to one of the end microphones, we would appreciate that. Any speakers with each of the microphones on the end are live, so you can. Then everybody will hear your question too.
I always thought I was plenty loud.
Oh, that's better. Yeah.
Dedicated funds getting
Yes.
cut. Rainy day fund
Right.
will be emptied. That's going to affect our bond rating, and that's not acceptable. That means New Hampshire's going to pay more for money it needs to borrow. How is that How can you
Well-
possibly think that that's a good thing?
I agree with you about rating dedicated funds, because the highway fund was one of the first that was always rated, no matter which administration had it.
Absolutely.
And it seems like it's one way of quickly balancing the budget. And while I don't agree with it, we will see what happens, because the Senator said that they're going to try to put a lot of money back into the rainy day fund. But may I remind you, too, that the surplus that came out of last year's budget, half of it was spent by the previous administration before they could put the balance in the into the rainy day fund.
I did talk with Senator Forrester, as a matter of fact, today about some of those funds, and that is one that's off limits. It will not be, they're going to make sure that they fund
And there's
that.
definitely going to be a conference between the two bodies, simply because the Senate has already said that it's unacceptable, many of the changes that came across. I know it was very hard for a lot of Republicans to vote for this budget. I mean, cutting Meals on Wheels in half, when most of that is, people that are just spending their own time to take care of this.
That's not completely correct. It's one of the things we did in that budget in HB2 is allow HHS to move their funds around. We told them that they have so much money to spend, and this was our priority, but if they wanted to spend it on wheels and I mean, that was in one group of funds. So the same thing happens in the county fund. I mean, somebody gets excited about something and it never happens. So let's wait and see what happens as far as the different agencies go, as far as how they're going to allocate their budget.
If I may supplement those comments, we did seek confirmation from the Commissioner of DHHS that those funds wouldn't be taken from Meals on Wheels. And as a matter of fact, the committee themselves received written confirmation from the Commissioner that funds would be prioritized to Meals on Wheels. I mean, the Commissioner, as I'm sure you well know, has the discretion to move funds around within the DHHS budget and disperse them as they see fit.
So they're going to have to pick and choose between who deserves this money and who doesn't?
Well, given the fact that there's a 5% increase actually on the HHS budget for the next biennium, for the next budget.
They have the largest portion of the budget, somewhere close to 40%, and it's been increased more than percentage-wise than some of the other budgets.
And as my first day in Health and Human Services, we had to look at the dashboard, and it was already $50 million in a hole. It's time to rein in some of the spending, because some of these designated funds are being rated, and that dashboard being $50 million, I think, actually talking with Senator Forrester today, it's whittled down to about $20 million deficit that we have to make up for.
You do realize that every budget cycle, HHS gets less and less money.
You have to look at the federal government when they make a promise and they don't follow through, and we are depending upon that money, and it doesn't come in. That puts the state at a disadvantage.
And that's our responsibility to fund, yes.
Unfortunately, that's what happens in a lot of areas, but mostly all in HHS, because they get the highest percentage of the federal funds.
Special needs children, they need
And
it as well.
there have been cuts, and I think, I don't know this absolutely, but I believe that the general fund part of the budget has increased over the years, not decreased. It's the federal half of it, or...
Yeah, I think you want to look at that. How about the money coming out of the renewable energy grants to cities and towns? That's going to hurt towns and cities. Also, the meals and rooms distribution is going to be cut, so Nashua will feel that desperately. Infrastructure aid to cities and towns is going to be cut. Now, Nashua has a tax cap, so we're going to feel this pretty deeply if this budget isn't drastically changed by the Senate and then confirmed by the House as well.
Well, again, we're going to have to look at all of those things, but the stabilization fund, that was one of the changes that the House did make. The original suggestion was to cut the stabilization fund by 24%. And that was because that fund had been established in 2007 to help during the recession. It was only supposed to last for 4 years. It has now lasted, 6 or 7 years? And we limited that to a 10% reduction.
And just one more point I want to make, well, two actually. One is the colleges. Colleges and universities are going to see some cuts. And we really have an epidemic right now as far as deaths from overdoses. New Hampshire is just in deep, deep trouble. 321 people died last year, and I understand the first 3 months of this year are just out of sight with deaths.
In Health and Human Services regarding that, there are a number of bills that we're addressing with the opioid overdoses and stuff. And
Well, Narcan isn't going to do it. I mean, we really do need to
I didn't
work
say
from the
Narcan.
other end.
There are a number of bills that are before us, a number. And
Funding programs that are going to make a difference, because those really have been rated. Those funds have been rated every budget as well.
Well, I don't know what you mean by rated, but I do know that there are a number of legislations, bipartisan legislation that's coming out here that to address a lot of the opioid abuse.
I can send you the data if you like. I think it's.
I'm getting plenty of data on this, so we know that there's a serious problem, and the problem is being addressed, and we are definitely taking a serious look at that in the Senate. If you want to come to our hearings, you would know that that is a high priority.
People, 321 New Hampshire citizens is too many to lose for something that's preventable.
Some of the facts
to
that
that.
are listed in this budget overview, and while there were some reductions, there were also some increases, especially in mental health and what was the other area? Developmental problems, I believe it was.
Well, I won't keep you any longer. Thank you for your time.
No, not at all.
You send your data.
Will do.
Thank you.
I wanted to speak, if I may, also to the higher education question as to whether or not the university system was going to be taking a hit. As a matter of fact, that's not the case. The last legislature appropriated $153 million to the university system for the biennium. That's 14 and 15. And when they did that, they lauded the proposal, they froze tuition, and they gave a thank you card to the governor, as a matter of fact, for signing the budget that contained that appropriation. So it's important to understand that the House budget currently seeks to give them the same amount, $153 million for the coming fiscal years 16-17. Their funding is not being cut, it is level funded. Thank you for your comments. We appreciate it.
I'll add something on the educational bit, too. We supported the community colleges to do even more than they were requested, because they've done a good job over the last 2 years, last 4 years, in providing the type of education needed for people to get jobs in a number of different critical areas and new areas that they wanted to get into. They're putting up a whole new HVAC technician training session in Manchester, for example. The university, this is the capital budget, and the university picked up we gave them just what the governor requested. So we are supporting as much as we can. One of the things that overall we're trying to do is develop more income by having more companies come and settle in and start their business in New Hampshire. And there'll be an accelerated effort in that area. Does anybody else have a question? Yes. Please come up. Thank you.
Thank you for rolling with us as far as where the microphones are placed. I certainly wish we could have a somewhat more intimate arrangement here, but
Like the Price is Right.
it kind of is.
Come on down.
We're deferring to technology.
I've never talked with any of you before, but I appreciate you, coming up and introducing yourself. The first thing I would like to ask is, from what I read in the paper, Nashua's mayor, Donna Lee, met with the Nashua delegation recently. and she explained, I'm guessing, I just know what I know from the newspaper, that the budget apparently is put together in Concord was going to be hurtful to the city of Nashua, sending lots of expenses down here. And as Jan Schmidt said, we've got a spending cap here. So given that the mayor, a Republican, reached out to you all, could you all explain to me how you listened but could not agree with the mayor?
Well, it's a big problem, and we're just one city in the state. We might have voted against some of the things that happened. For one thing, I know I've talked with the mayor about the rail contract, and the rest of the state is fairly strongly against paying for a rail development. I tried to get, instead of a two-phase program, I asked for a one-phase program, which would be $2 million of capital in the capital budget, and they wouldn't even go for that. I got 6 votes out of about 20 people on the committee.
So if I'm understanding, so the mayor's objection to the budget is centered on the rail? Or, I mean, I guess from what I took away from the paper, it was a lot of things, not just
Oh,
rail.
yeah, no, I just used that as the one example
right.
that I personally got involved in that particular development as a recommendation to the overall state budget.
Okay, and
Now, there are other things too. One, the biggest part I think she has a problem with is the pension. It's about a $2 million
Exactly.
bill that she gets, the city gets for pension, covering the pension, which is underfunded.
And one of the really thing that's hurting a lot of the pensioners, retired firefighters, retired police departments, they're having to pay for the cost of their health care, which is eating up half of their pension, which could potentially eat up half. And that's a problem, and we recognize that in the Senate, and I did actually talk to Senator Forrester about that, and I told her that was a major concern, that we can't let that happen, because some of these people foregone Social Security, you know, I think it's Class B or Class 2, people foregone some of their Social Security in order to be on this pension program, and now they're having to absorb that through their medical, either deductibles or the cost of that medical insurance. So that's a huge hit for some of these retired people on a fixed budget. So again, it's still in the process in the Senate. We're still looking at every item, but this is a big budget. So we're listening.
okay, and let me just bring it back. The Republican mayor of the city of Nashua reached out to you all and all your Nashua colleagues, and apparently, with one exception of one person, I'm forgetting the Ward 5 maybe, voted yes on one and no on the other, again, according to what I saw in the newspaper. So I know there's a lot of cities and towns represented in Concord, but I was real surprised that apparently the Republican delegation didn't give any, I don't want to be rude, it just sounds like you gave no consideration to what the mayor of Nashua was up against, and you're representing us. So that's where I'm going with it.
The question is not on just one element of the budget, the overall budget. We did argue and we did get concessions for some of the cities. We got the stabilization fund to have only a 10% cut instead of a 24% cut, which came out of the committee. That's just one example. But we tried to keep it as reasonable as possible, but we also ran on a platform of no new taxes and no new fees. And that's what we voted on, we worked on it, and we got what I considered the best thing we could get at this time. Now, whether the Senate is able to find more funds or a better way of distributing the money that we're getting, that all comes out in the next 2 months. And then we'll vote on it. We'll get something different than what we have now.
Okay. And let me just say, I'm so glad you emphasized what you ran on, the no new taxes, no new fees. Because I got to tell you, I think that is penny wise and pound foolish. And I say that with respect, or maybe not, I'm not sure. Let me say that I caught some of the federal budget this afternoon. They're in a conference and whatever, and some of the, and I'm trying to be not all one side, not all the other side, whatever, but going right up the middle. There was Senator Angus King from Maine, and he talked about what they're up against in Washington, and I wrote it down. And he said, you're not going to cut your way out of this. You're not going to be able to raise enough. You can't do it in isolation of no fees, no revenue, whatever. It'll be a combination of cuts, fees, and growth. That's how you do it. So I think it's fairly partisan to just say no taxes, no fees, no nothing, doesn't matter what's going on, whether people are having heroin overdoses, whether the schools are coming up against things. And at the same time, in your papers here, I'm seeing that there's some increases going to charter schools. And let me just say, I am not violently opposed to charter schools, but they do take away from our public schools.
If I may interrupt, but charter schools are public schools in New Hampshire. So I just wanted to put that out there. I think people think that
They're part of the public school system.
There's no
Well,
differentiation.
then if they're part of the public school system, is there currently reciprocity? My understanding is that the kids that go to charter schools can ask to come back to public schools for particular courses or whatever. So there should be the same reciprocity. And as far as their public schools, they do their own thing over there. But for example, if it's located in Nashua, we have the transportation expense for them, and
But
yet no oversight.
Are
over
the
that
charter schools
school.
funded as equally as
No, they aren't.
Okay, so they don't have the ability to provide as much services as the general public could.
But if special services are needed, we're paying for that for those kids. And again, I'm not blasting charter schools. I think there's a place for them. But I think the jury is probably out on whether they are a totally good thing, a mixed bag, which I tend to think it's a mixed bag of accomplishments, or not working at all. But to some extent, doesn't matter how I feel, because some of my money is going off to them, and I have a right to feel that that's at the expense of the public schools. Can I just...
May I ask, one of your concerns, are you concerned about the cost of special ed needs, or that's a huge...
It's a huge cost.
And the feds aren't funding us fully at that.
They haven't been for a long time.
And so
That's
we're
just
having to
some-
pick that pace up. There are a lot of areas where it seems like the Fed is dropping the ball. We're not.
That's been around for years. We've just kind of sucked it up and did what we had to do.
And we're saying to the people, you've sucked up enough. All right, it's time. That's why we ran on the platform of no new taxes and fees, because, there are a lot of people out there, and our population is aging. And
Well, I'm one of them.
well, me too. I got a couple of grays. I'm a grandpa. But there are a number of people that are on a fixed income, and we have to keep that in mind as we consider all these expenses. And these fixed incomes aren't necessarily increasing.
But what are you saying about special education funding you yourself? What are you saying?
Well, I'm asking you what is your feeling about the special, because we have to fund this. These kids need to be taken care of.
Uh-huh.
And there are expenses that are everywhere and that are not being funded properly. So we're trying to make it in a way, at least that's what I'm getting from the consensus from the House. They're trying to compromise their way to make sure that these are all funded without having drastic increases in your taxes or in your fees. And we all railed against that tax cap. Not the tax cap, the gas tax. And that was an interesting concept. I mentioned that to Senator Forrest today. What about the gas tax? Is all that money going to the bridges and the roads? And she said, oh, well, the funny thing about that is that, that money is going, but it took away the baseline that was also designated for the roads. And so somebody's playing games, and we're trying to make sure that designated funds go to where they're supposed to go, and that we put a hold on new spending, if at all possible. And hopefully we can grow ourselves in this economy to make some differences and hopefully cut down the cost of some of these budgets. This is a big process. There's a lot to this. And,
Of course there is.
And so,
You know, when the Telegraph recently had an editorial characterizing the budget, I believe they likened it to the 30-year-old who's sitting in his parents' basement on the couch and had some kind of a job but didn't want to get off their behind and go get a full-time job. I took away from that an analogy that, well, maybe there needs to be some revenue sources looked at, which leads me into Senate Bill 116 that it has to do with
Constitutional carry?
Constitutional carry, and there was a license permit process that apparently is going to be waived. Wasn't there a fee of some sorts for that permit?
I think it's $10 or something, 10 or 15.
And so why did people just say, oh, well, who cares about that? That was something, I'm not sure how much money you had. I read estimates that it was 900,000, 300,000, somewhere in between, whatever. But you let that just go.
Well, you know, one of the things that I'd like to address, you know, if you're talking about wasted money in Health and Human Services, you know, we were talking about the EBT cards, and there's some fraud going on there. There's about 2% fraud with the EBT cards. People,
wait a minute,
I'm talking about waste. I'm
Okay,
talking
but
about
I'm
waste.
talking about, I guess I'm talking about responsibility, that you had a fee for something and you just let it go.
Well, there are a lot of things like that. I mean, we could bicker over that, but you know, when we're talking about money, that
There's other places to
there's
get the money.
all kinds of places. And the reason I was bringing up Health and Human Services,
Yeah.
Carl, is the fact that we found that there's so much fraud going in the Health and Human Service, and from the department heads themselves that said, just this last session, we've got $1 million of fraud that should be going to the mothers and the special needs people, but it's being stolen. And I said, well, what can we do about fixing this problem with fraud? And they said, well, we need more agents because we're 13 months behind. There's an area where we can raise some more money because we're talking about revenue stream. The monies that are designated to the people that really need it, it's being stolen from them. And those department heads are 13 months behind. That's a lot of money that should be going to the families that really need it. That's all I wanted to say. I'm sorry for interrupting you, Carl.
Okay, but I'm just going back to, there was a fee permit process for your concealed carry guns, and apparently that is, I believe it's just yet to be fully voted on. Is that right, Senator?
It passed the Senate. I think it needs to pass the House.
Okay, but so I'm just saying you had a small goose laying a couple of half golden eggs, but you just let the goose loose. Apparently because it's well, I guess I don't know. And I will just add that recently when I was up at the State House, I will tell you as a citizen, and I've traveled in most of the states around the country, which doesn't mean anything because I certainly haven't gone into all their state houses, but I found it challenging, it's almost frightening to go into our State House. There's no magnetrons going in, and to realize that the security guard I talked to was not carrying a weapon, but everybody else around me or in the meeting room, the legislative hearing room, might have been. I mean, what?
I think there was a bill that actually addressed that. Somebody wanted to make sure that the security guards were actually carrying. Yeah, there
well,
was a bill.
There was a bill, yeah.
Okay, and my understanding is they don't, but apparently in your general floor, if there's a problem, a security guard can get a hold of a state police person.
And they're there, and they guard the Senate chambers and of course, the House chambers. They're right there at both ends.
Well, didn't I feel safe, surrounded by probably half the people in the room I was in, probably had a gun, and if something happened, I have no idea as a private citizen how trained they are to even hit the wall if there's a
Guarantee
problem.
you, they're trained.
Yeah, so maybe you want to find some money to get Kevlar vests that people can pick up as they come in so they can feel something. I'm being facetious with that. Okay, and I guess the very last thing is there was something in the newspaper about the voter ID. Is there going to be a state expense of like $137,000 to provide all these cameras? That was the number that was published.
We have some information on that, too.
Brand new information,
That's
if I'm not mistaken. I saw your email, Elizabeth. Why don't
Yeah,
you
my
share that?
understanding is that the Secretary of State is working on using HAVA funds, that's Help America Vote Act funds, to purchase what amounts to modern-day Polaroid cameras that print on demand without the need for a freestanding printer or memory cards. And because HAVA funds are federal funds, this is essentially cost neutral to the state. So basically, precincts will be provided cameras with instant printing capability. There will be no need for anyone to use cell phones. And I believe also the Secretary of State is working on the purchasing process, and said that the cities, including Nashua, that have municipal primary elections, and we're going to be one of the first ones with our mayoral primary election on September 8th. We should have those cameras well in advance of those elections, and that should be, as I said, cost neutral. So,
That's federal funds.
yes.
That's all of us sending our money so we can come back to do this. And I happen to be one of those people. I just didn't see that we had a voter fraud problem to begin with. So my position on that was that you all found a solution for a problem that
Well, the Secretary of
So,
State came
Secretary of
out and
State.
said that he found, in the last election, serious voter fraud.
And he's a Democrat.
in terms of numbers.
We're trying to get the data on that. I mean, there were over 200 names that were given to our judicial group that is supposed to follow up on that. They processed one. The legislature can't make them process any faster, but they have a pile of supposed voter fraud that went on. I know one mailing that I did personally got 5% of the people's envelopes returned not at this address, and these are people that voted.
That's interesting. I think it should be able to be verified some way. I think we all deserve how
I
much
agree
there
with you.
actually is.
I agree with you.
If there's 5%, but to do a mailing and have people not be at that address, I don't think that's all uncommon. Not with every 2 years and people move.
A
And
mailing that at the time they went to vote, you know, I can see them moving, but I don't think they vote and then move
well,
next
then
week.
then I guess if it's a burning issue, you'll just have to find some money. But you can't, because you're not going to raise any revenues or fees to get this thing taken care of.
The
But this is
Secretary
being
of State
addressed.
said that he would get funds to do that when we passed the bill.
Okay.
Yeah, be that as it may, our Secretary of State's been doing this an awfully long time. He's very highly regarded throughout the country for the job that he does do and has done, and he's made it very clear that he recognizes a serial problem that's been going on for some time of voter fraud. He'd like to address it in as much of a cost-effective manner as possible. We think he may have found one.
Okay, that is whatever. Well, anyway, that is
Thank you.
it.
Thank you for sharing your comments very much.
Well, thank you for coming and doing this. Now I know who to look for in the grocery stores.
Okay.
Okay, please do.
Feel free to say hi.
I will do that, and you too.
Okay.
Thank you.
Does anybody else have a question or a statement or anything they want to say?
Come on
Please come up.
Hi, I'm Tim Dox, and I've written to a couple of you before. First, I'd like to congratulate you for, one, having this meeting, although it wasn't well publicized, so I didn't know until Elizabeth let me know. The issue I wrote all of you about, well, all the representatives, was about the Department of Transportation budget.
Yep.
First of all, I'm a proponent for trains. Carl, I appreciate your comments this morning or today and telling me what's really going on. I'm not surprised, but Nashua is the second largest city in the state, so hopefully we get a little more respect, I think, in the rest of the state than we've been getting. Regarding the Department of Transportation budget, what I had written is right before your vote, I wrote that I can't understand why we can't just have a gas tax increase so that the people that are using the roads are the people that are paying for the roads. The problem we have currently, and what I want to thank you all for, is apparently in this sheet I just read, you finally decided that the police department shouldn't be getting highway funds that are the Department of Transportation funds, which just makes a ton of sense, because if they want their funds, they should go get them themselves through the general fund or whatever fund they need. But I do believe that not just in New Hampshire, but across the country, we have a serious problem with our highways, and we're letting it get out of control. And a 10-cent change in the gas in the tax on gas, if you go to the local gas station, the price changes 10 cents a day. So I don't understand. I realize you all have made a commitment to not raise taxes and fees, but the reality is we haven't raised well, other than the 4-cent tax increase to pay for a single project, the I-93 project, we haven't really raised the taxes on it, and I think those taxes go back to 1996, I believe, is where the rate was established.
In the 90s, yeah.
At the same time, my car now gets 32 miles to the gallon, so I know I'm paying a whole lot less in taxes than I was paying just one car ago. And yet, as a federal taxpayer, I've subsidized people buying Priuses and other hybrid cars, which are paying virtually nothing for gas taxes because they just don't use any. So if we don't come up with another funding mechanism so that everybody is paying for the use of the highways, then we're going to continue to have potholes and roads falling apart and bridges possibly falling down. And I just don't understand the reluctance of the legislators in this state to adequately find a way to fund it. I mean, when I'm reading that they're going to lay off 700 employees and all, I realize a lot of that is hyperbole. But the fact is, we've all driven around the state. The roads are not like they were 10 years ago. They're in much worse shape than they were 10 years ago, although we have a beautiful highway out here in Nashua that, you know, is primo compared to others. But it's not going to continue. The roads are falling apart, and if we don't do something about it, you know, it's our own stupidity of putting it off and saying somebody else will fix it later. That's really all I had to add.
Let me address that since I'm on the Public Works and Highways Department. It has been a problem because they were using the highway fund more as a slush fund than anything else. And
they're doing that at a federal level too, so.
Yeah, and we're forming a commission to look at all ways of subsidizing the roads. You see the turnpike roads, they pay for themselves and more so. So they are, as you say, very good.
Thanks to the people in Merrimack.
Anyway, we want to make sure, one, how do the roads suffer damage? You know, cars, do we do something by weight, which is the registration, or do we do something not by the fuel? The fuel, you're right, a lot of them aren't using that fuel like they used to. Or do we have some other way of looking at it? Because
or do we have a combination of what?
A combination of several things, maybe. But I know there's some problem on the rural roads when the heavy trucks use them. They do much more damage. Maybe they're going to have to pay something if they use certain, highways.
I heard once that trucks do about 1,000 times the damage that cars do.
So
2,000?
we're trying to look at it a little bit more logically. And hopefully by the time the next legislature comes in, we'll have a plan to put into effect.
Okay, I guess the point I would leave you at is if you continue to make a pledge of no new taxes and no new fees, then you've locked yourself out of ever addressing the Department of Transportation needs, because our revenue keeps going down as cars get more efficient. And if if you go back and say, well, we can't raise fees or we can't raise taxes, then all you're going to face is reduced revenue for the Department of Transportation. And it's not that I'm a lover of the Department of Transportation. I just realized that roads are important, and I wish the rest of the country would get the same
Infrastructure is
emphasis.
important for the whole state, and we
Yes.
want to make sure that that improves so we could attract tourists and we can attract new businesses.
Business, yeah.
I agree. Thank you.
And I'd just like to remind everybody, if they do write us, either by email or whatever, make sure you have your name, address, and phone number on there, because a lot of times we get emails and we don't know where they're from. We get a lot of people that even write us from out of state, and we don't always know that. So it's much easier for us to get back to you that way. As far as public press releases and stuff, it's difficult. I don't understand why. I wrote press releases 2 weeks ago. One newspaper used them. We're using the public access channel 96. There are public messages on there. So we'll be putting our messages on channel 96. And we'll ask you, if you have questions, we'll try to answer them. Both Kevin and I have shows on there, so you might be able to find some of the information on the shows that we put together. But we do need to get information back to the public, and I think we'll probably be looking at other taxes, but we wanted to wait until the economy got a little bit more settled than before we proposed any more ways of getting income.
I think you're probably looking more at fees increases rather than taxes, though. That would probably be the more likely in my guesstimation. And you're bringing up the fact that some of those designated funds have been raided. Everybody knows it. It's time to do something about it. You know. Yeah. Good questions.
And one of the things that we're trying to do too is to make sure our agencies are operating a little bit more effectively. There are a number of ways that we can improve the operation of our agencies as to what they do for the money they get.
And to add to that, I just want to put a little feather in Carl's hat. He was actually introduced some legislation to add transparency to some, what of our vendors, some accountability to the vendors as to, what they're putting out. And I don't know how that fared with the House.
That got incorporated in Senator Carson's bill. But what we were trying to do, there's no way of checking up, except on the multi-million-dollar highway funds, of checking on the performance of a vendor. Okay? There's no technical way that we have no structured way of having a write-up whether they delivered the product on time, under or over budget, or whatever. They do it sort of by word of mouth rather than any formality. And I was trying to put together just a one-page report so that we could know if somebody screwed up and you wouldn't have to go to them next time. So that's one of the things. They're automating the purchasing department very nicely, but it's a slow process.
And as far as revenue streams, I want to give a little kudos to this gentleman who tried to create a revenue stream with the movie industry, attracting them into New Hampshire. And our airport generates all kinds of revenues for us, directly or indirectly, and that's a revenue stream. Well, we have a gentleman who had a creative idea.
I'd be happy to speak to it if you care to lend an ear. House Bill 655 dealt with welcoming the motion picture industry into New Hampshire, utilizing some tax incentives very creatively. There was some opposition here, some support there. Tremendous bipartisan support, co-sponsors among whom were the good Senator Avard. Ken Gidge is one of our delegation here. He's a state rep. He's right here in Nashua. He supported it. Lou D'Alessandro, Senator Lou D'Alessandro as well. As a matter of fact, our own Senator Betty Lasky, and there are others as well. The purpose for which is to attract an industry that when they do come to town, and as you may know, being neighbors of Massachusetts, when they come to Massachusetts, a lot of money gets spent. Not only is tax revenue raised for the state, but a lot of money is spent right there in the region that's hosting their activities. The local businesses and ancillary support businesses that cater to them, they benefit immensely. So when the water rises, all boats go up with it. Jobs are created, both union and non-union jobs. There's really no downside. I've known this because I've been involved in the industry in my own way for about 10 years. Rhode Island has experienced this uptick in business and benefits, so has Massachusetts, and many other states around the country have too. So it's really a very active marketplace. New Hampshire has unique locations and unique stories that have yet to be told. One I happen to be working on myself creatively is the General John Stark story. You know, we've seen how well miniseries on HBO like John Adams did, you know, that regaled the exploits and the biopic of John Adams and his family. So there's a lot of fun to be had, but there's a lot of cachet that can be garnered from that kind of activity in your own home state. You know, who doesn't go to Philadelphia and either successfully or want to run up those steps and jump around like Rocky, right? Squam Lake continues to enjoy a robust influx of tourism and attention and curiosity revolving around a 40-year-old film and play written by a friend of mine, Ernest Thompson, the Oscar winner for On Golden Pond. So there are reasons upon reasons upon reasons why creative approaches to raising revenues in this state are still on the table and deserve attention. That bill got a lot further this time than it did a couple of years ago, whereas it was killed in committee, whereas this one was tabled by the House itself, which we'll call it cryogenic suspension for now, but I intend to bring it back with new language in 2016, and I expect a groundswell of support. So that kind of activity is stuff we're pursuing because, yeah, the pledge of no taxes and fees is a stringent one. It's a very stringent one. We're committed to it. So we've got to look for, flip over every stone that we can in order to raise revenue. So thank you. New question.
Atlan Schmidt, 11 Pope Circle.
Indeed.
I would like each of you to explain to me individually your rationale for sunsetting Medicaid expansion. This is a program where for 10 cents on the dollar in the out years, and free, essentially, right now, we are covering more than 37,000 Granite Staters. This is a program that has reduced uncompensated costs to emergency rooms by 15%. It seems to me there is no good reason whatever for turning down that money from the federal government. Even Montana, a very Republican place, today announced that they were going to take Medicaid money. So please, individually, explain to me your position and why you're turning it away.
I'd like to be the first. It was already sunsetted. It was already there, and what legislation was there was to extend...
You're dodging the question, Kevin.
I'm answering it.
No, you're dodging the question.
Let me finish. Let me finish.
Tell me what your position is going to be when the time comes to vote on Medicaid expansion continuing.
Okay, I'm going to answer you. I'm going to ask you to be polite and listen. There was a bill to extend it further than what had already happened. There is already a sunset bill in it. First of all, I wasn't for the Medicaid expansion. And second of all, there are expenses in our budget right now because of this Medicaid that the federal government promised there wouldn't be more expenses. There are more expenses with the Medicaid, and it's a little bit more complicated than what you're saying. But the bottom line is there was a bill to extend it even further. We killed that in committee, and I was happy to do so because the numbers aren't there yet. You're claiming they're there, and I sit on that committee.
Explain to me what numbers are not there right now. Please be specific. I don't like these answers that are sort of generic and free-floating. What numbers?
They're the truth. The numbers haven't come in. All the revenue streams haven't come in. The numbers are not there, and that's why we would not extend it any further until we have actual data, and we don't, and that's the truth.
And if I call the governor tomorrow, what will she tell me about the data? Because frankly, I don't believe your position.
Then we agree to disagree. I'm telling you that is the truth. We do not have the actual data yet. It is not complete, and we're not going to extend the program further beyond its sunset that is already in the bill until we have the actual data.
And when you have the data, what will you do? Tell me what you will do personally.
Well, first, I wasn't for the Medicaid expansion. I think it's a disaster, and I don't like it. And so
thank you. That's what I expected to hear.
And I think it's wrong. And period. And I don't believe in socialism.
I'd like to hear the representatives also answer the question.
We'd be happy to, if you'd be kind enough to allow us to complete our answers, you know, prior to commenting or asking for us to augment what we have to say. I'd also appreciate that. If we can agree on that, I'd be happy to move forward. Terrific. Some of the, I mentioned earlier, when in earlier commentary that the House budget itself spends over 5% more on HHS than our current budget. That's just a blanket statement. And some of the increase is attributable to federal changes in Medicaid eligibility and increases in care as a result of the mental health settlement. But overall, total dollars being spent on HHS programs and services are up by a respectable amount. Now, did you know that the House budget spends an average of $24,000 per benefit recipient? Were you aware of that?
For Medicaid?
Yes.
Or for general HHS recipients?
General HHS recipients.
Okay, we're talking about Medicaid right now.
Sure, sure. Well, we are getting to it. Look, as Senator Avard mentioned, that sunset was already built into the bill. And when the amendments, voluminous though they were, came forth to the floor, and there were two of them, in neither instance was that sunset removed. Now, if you're asking why we voted for it, well, it was built into it, and there was nothing we could do about it. We couldn't line item that item and say, well, I can't vote for it because that's still in there. Ultimately, you had to make a judgment call. As you know, we have a green and a red button, and there's an awful lot of considerations that go into that decision, particularly on the budget on the day that we make that vote. There's an awful lot of considerations. You're naming one of them, and I appreciate that you are. It's very important, but there's a ton of things to consider when you make that vote. So it's not the only thing that's driving us.
So, Representative, when that vote comes up for reauthorization, how will you vote? Senator Avard was brave enough to tell us how he would vote.
Yeah.
How will you vote?
I would vote in concert with Senator Avard.
2 noes.
Thank you.
2 more reps to go.
I don't have all the numbers either, but that's one of the problems, I think, in making any kind of a judgment or an okay. You want to, if you're going to go ahead and you're going to go spend money and support it, you want to know that you're getting your money's worth out of that expenditure. From what I've heard, when we turned to Medicaid, a lot of people who had their own insurance dropped it so that they could get Medicaid. First of all, I don't think Medicaid is a good service because you don't get a very high level of service. The payment on Medicaid to the medical personnel is much lower than it is on Medicare or any of the normal insurances. So I think that that I would lean towards working something out that used regular insurance instead of Medicaid. I don't.
So when reauthorization comes up, you will also be voting no?
As long as the numbers are consistent with what we've heard so far.
3 noes.
No.
Thank you.
And we thank you for your questions.
Is there anybody else that wants to make any comments, or we got some more time? Yes, please.
Please, by all means.
One point that's been consistently made in these past questions that I've agreed with is that growth is the most sustainable way to deal with these budget issues. Another point has been made that growing the business climate in the state might be one of the ways to deal with that. In talking to local businesses, what tax climate are they asking for, and what other steps are being taken to attract businesses to the state?
I think one of the biggest concerns of businesses is the cost of energy. There's no doubt. And balancing that cost of energy is a real dilemma. Right now in my district, District 12, we have Ringe, New Ipswich, Greenville. We have Mason, Brookline, Hollis, and of course 3 wards in Nashua. They're proposing a gas line to go through that, and hey, I'm all for natural gas coming into our state to help lower the cost of energy. However, we have a problem with property rights, and so that's a dilemma, and we need to lower our energy costs. That is one of the huge expenses in our state, so we got to come up with some solutions for that. As far as lowering regulations or decreasing regulations, that's also a very important aspect for the businesses. I know we got a couple of bills in the Senate that was tabled. We passed them, the reduction in what was it, the business profit tax and the business enterprise tax, and of course that was a level funding type of, it wasn't going to make a huge difference in the budget. But we wanted to show that the businesses, that New Hampshire is open for business. And so we wanted to make it a friendly atmosphere for the businesses in New Hampshire. So I don't know if that helps. We have to come up with a solution for energy.
Okay, and the second part of that, just attracting new business to the state, are changes being made in that regard to not just for the businesses that are here, but for the ones that are looking for places to resettle to attract those businesses? He mentioned his cinema bill, which I think would be a good step for a new industry, but are there any that are being successful within the legislature?
Well, excuse me, I think we should have brought water. The business enterprise tax and the energy is two big things, big impediments to bringing people here compared to other states. I think that we are doing a recruiting type of thing. We're cooperating more. DRED is providing new programs to attract businesses and working with the Chambers of Commerce. The Chambers of Commerce had some people up here. We have in Nashua a big opportunity with what's happening off Spitbrook Road and a couple other places that we could add more industry. I think the taxes are reasonable here because of the industry that we have already. And we're working with the mayors and people to see how we can encourage that. The other area is with tourists, bringing more tourists in. And I don't know if you saw the paper today, but they want to put in a big thing up and hooks it. But there's a big discussion against that. I think we have to look at some of these things a little bit better than not in my backyard. If it benefits us a little bit more, we have to look at how we can do that with the minimum of problems with the neighborhood. We saw Placedown, I guess it was, talking about railroads. They rejected railroads just coming into their town from across the border. It just shows that people are, there's certain hindrances to moving ahead in certain areas. And we have to try to get something that pleases everybody. Another one thing that they're looking at is this facility up in the White Mountains that they want to develop, the balsams. And they're looking how they can help the people who want to develop that, because that's a $200 million development. But those are some of the activities that are being done. Go ahead.
If I may also comment, I think your question is paramount. It's paramount. Small business growth and development in any given state is we've heard it said that it's the engine of America. It's the engine of a community, and I think that's no more evidenced by the fact that a few short years ago, well, short to me, it was 1987 and 1997. That might be a while for you, but in those years, Money Magazine themselves named Nashua the #1 place in the country to live. Now it's a big country, and that was because, in no small part of our tax structure and our friendly business and incubation environment, New Hampshire and Nevada at that time were the two best states within which to incubate a small business and bring it up to a point of being a medium-sized enterprise that annualized at $6 million or less. Those are huge stats. Now the business environment and the tax environment and what have you, what the BET and BPT were at that point, I don't know. I haven't done that research. Perhaps I should. I'd like to find out how it contrasts with how things are looking today. But the fact is, things can be done. And with a Republican majority that was selected by the people of this district, and the state for that matter, a majority that's above 60% in the House, all are friendly to those ideas and to those principles, and see no reason why we can't get our state right back to where it was in terms of preeminence of business growth and business activity. We're currently number 6th in small business growth in New England. There's only 6 New England states. Mm-hmm. It's unacceptable. Lots can be done.
One of the other inhibitors for attracting new businesses is the cost of workers' comp in this state. And we had a solution, we thought, in the Senate, and somehow it got re-referred. But workers' comp needs to be addressed. If it's not addressed, it's an expense. We had a draconian kind of solution that if the cost doesn't go down, it was going to be a fee for service, and nobody likes that because that's centralized government telling you what you're going to charge. We don't like that, but they didn't go for the deal because they foresaw, meaning the providers foresaw, that they weren't going to be able to keep their promises. And it's been a discussion that some of the providers have been gouging the citizens of New Hampshire for at least 20 to 30 years on the workers' comp. So that is an inhibitor for people coming to this state. But what we have in the budget is there's earmarked money that is designated for tourism, and for every $1 that is put towards tourism, it generates between $8 and $9 of revenue for our state. And I believe you guys in the House cut it from 8% to 4%, and we're going to try to restore that because the tourism, I mean, the people that have trailers and these campgrounds really rely on that business, and there's a lot of business that they draw to New Hampshire. So, you know, when the state invests in something and it has an $8 or $9 return, that's a great idea. But that's another area for revenue stream. I don't know, did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, good.
Let me just add that education that I brought up before, the community colleges and even the universities are working so that they're developing R&D centers, innovation centers, where they're encouraging people to start businesses. They are training people in certain technology so that their workers are be available to these people who want to do certain types of work. There's an advanced welding group up in, I think it's Littleton. You know, each of the community college centers has been developing a sort of expertise that wasn't here 5 years ago. And I think that's one of the things that we pushed. I know with capital budget, we gave them a lot more money than they've been having before.
Thank you.
Hope that helps. Great questions, by the way. Thank you.
Is there anything else out there that you want to bring up and talk about? We don't have all the facts here.
Hi. Excuse me. I just wanted to know if each of you could maybe go through and talk a little bit about some of the top 2 to 3 issues you each are looking at going forward, instead of what's gone on in the past, but what you are looking forward, and where you're looking for input or support on those issues as they refer to the state and specifically within Nashua.
I guess I can start off with it.
Feel free.
I'm looking at several things. One, I come from a manufacturing background, and I'm looking for better operation among our agencies. I think there's a lot of disorganization, not lack of communication within the agencies. I've heard some terrible examples where, well, for one thing, when I was elected in 2010, we had a commission looking at rules and regulations. And you know, the definition of a contract employee versus an employee or an independent contractor, we're using 4 different definitions in our agencies. And even though it was brought up and they were supposed to change it, it wasn't changed in the last 3 years. And now we have, within one department, Department of Safety, 2 different one agency, 2 different departments are using 2 different definitions. And it's different from the federal definition, by the way. So now they're fighting because I think it's one workman's comp and the other one, I can't remember what the department is. They all want their own definition. And until you get the agencies to do something sensible like that, correcting that, you have problems. You have inefficiencies. You have confused customers. The people who have businesses came to us back in 2011 and told us the stories that were just unbelievable. So there are other things too. Just in the nursing home question that came up, we had the home health people come in and say that we can't get paid for the visits of our RNs that have to go, that are required by federal law to go around and check on home services that are given to the people who need them. They haven't paid them in 2 years for some reason. We haven't been able to find out, but they haven't been able to get an answer. I worked, again, with the Department of Safety on some these licenses and stuff that they have. We have a deluge of licenses. We wonder sometimes whether we need to license people in every area just to collect fees or what, but they're not always sensible. And at that time, they did everything by paper. Well, the story I find out is they're still doing everything by paper. They don't have the forms on a computer. Some of them do, but most of them don't. And I found out from my neighbor that she works with well, a certain area, and when they hand the paper, you have to mail it back, and then if it's incorrect, or you have some additional information, you got to fill it all out all over again. Now, one thing we did in that 2011, 2012 is we worked with Department of Justice. They had 10 different counties and 10 different calling centers to schedule whatever trials or whatever legal issues had to be settled in the county courts. We told them that if you centralized it, we would give you another $1 million for some other project they wanted to do. We had to essentially bribe them to do centralized calling center. They now have one in Concord, works so effectively. They do it with half the number of people that they had in the 10 different locations, and they do it more efficiently, and they communicate among one another to solve problems. They are so taken with the new computer age that you can now do small claims court completely on the computer. You can make your claim, you can get it scheduled, and you can have even a hearing remotely. And they're gradually implementing that on every court. They have a beautiful plan, and they were very cooperative with the way they're spending their money. They even told us that, you know, we can only handle so much, and so we wanted to do more for this project, but if you need $1 million, you can take it out of this project, and we'll just delay it for 2 years. So you got to get that attitude throughout all the agencies in this, and you'll find out you'll be much more effective in the use of your money, and you'll get a lot more done.
Well said.
Okay, you want to?
I guess I'm next.
Anybody else?
Sure.
Any other top issues?
Well, I thought you were going.
Carl, you all set? Just wanted to make sure you.
Fine, no, fine.
Okay. Elizabeth, would you care to go?
Well, just my two issues are, you know, working towards transparency, generally speaking. Carl's bills, of course, work towards that, you know, so we can see better how money is spent. One bill that I that I had submitted, unfortunately, it was ITL'd, was one that was House Bill 302, which would have required a public hearing prior to the submission of a grant application by the Department of Education. Because one thing I encountered when I was going door to door last summer, a lot of people had concerns. They were upset about Common Core, and they said, you know, this was kind of pushed down on us. We didn't know that this was happening. And I think having an opportunity for the public to know ahead of time that certain things are happening would be a good thing. Unfortunately, this was killed, but I'm hoping that there may be other legislation in the future that can accomplish the same ends. So, and the other thing is privacy rights. House Bill 301, which I put in, that was retained by the Education Committee, and that would allow parents to opt their children out of the unique pupil identifier system. So just, you know, being able to respect, you know, privacy rights is an important thing. So I would hope that constituents would support that. So.
Great.
I remember two other examples if you want those out too. I think the governor finally realized that there needs to be somebody. She put in her budget a position of chief operating officer. The only problem was she added 6 people to go along with that office. So we had $1.5 million department spring up on this one, and I don't think she knows she knew how to use it, because most of the people said, look, that's what you're paying people six-figure salaries for. They should be essentially a chief operating officer, each one of the major departments. They should be able to get things done and get people organized to do things right. What was the other thing? I had another one example that, the audit. We have a department that does auditing for all the agencies. They audit not only the financial records, but the performance, the process, the procedures that go on. Those audits come out with a report, and there's nobody to follow up to make sure the recommendations are either discussed and either accepted or not accepted, or they don't get done. There's a person that there's one department that came in looking for a capital expense that was recommended 5 years ago. What now? What are you doing for 5 years? That was a simple project. So nobody follows up on some of these recommendations. They could be operating a lot more effectively than they are now. That's what I'm looking at.
At least in the House, it looks like from this ward, certainly we're of one mind. We're on the same choir when it comes to accountability and efficiency in government, specifically amongst our agencies and our larger agencies. H&HS got a lot of airtime during this conversation tonight. They consume roughly 40% of the state budget every biennium, and that would be one wonderful environment within which to apply those principles and do so very judiciously. We're doing our part. When we vote and we scrutinize, and the Finance Committee, God bless them, works for weeks and weeks, incredible hours to put together this budget. They try to make sure that they're as equitable as possible. Let me share a little blurb with you about the job that they did. Budget to budget, general fund spending related to H&HS by increasing $78 million in general funds and total funds by $131 million. That's an increase, not a cut. The numbers show it. And many programs are receiving increased funding. Some may not receive as much as they did during the last budget, but they're trying to make sure that our state's most vulnerable citizens receive essential care and services. The reason I shared that with you is that, again, we in the legislature, we're given a mandate to first of all, those in finance to put together the budget, and then we discuss it on the House floor and we vote our conscience based on what we know, based on what we've heard, and based on the supposition that whoever's receiving it on the other end with that catcher's mitt is going to know how to deal with it and deal with it effectively, and also be willing to be accountable for what they do. And if they are, then I think those kinds of numbers will be used far more effectively, and the kind of people, the vulnerable populations that we've been discussing here tonight will receive the fair shake that they deserve, that we can all agree that they deserve. Now, that's just H&HS, because that was kind of a bugaboo for me, because there's been a lot of misinformation out there in the last month about how we dealt with that budget for that particular agency. A lot of misinformation. They have not received a cut. They've received an increase. The second thing that's a big deal to me is education. The changes in the complexion of education in our state, and the spirit of cooperation, or conversely lack of it, between private education providers, from people who homeschool to private schools to public charter schools to the public school system. There can be a lot more, there's room for a lot more cooperative activity and behavior amongst those different educators. I sponsored a bill this very year that called for that kind of thing, whereas a private education provider could strike a private contract with a local SAU to share resources and curriculum and all that kind of thing. Didn't quite make it through the House, but it was a good idea, I think. So, I don't think education is ever going to go back to the way it was in the last century. I think the public education system in the last century in America has a great legacy, but I think times have changed. Technology is a big part of that, and I think sentiments have changed a lot about what constitutes a quality education. So I think we all have to have a much more serious discussion about how we're going to do that together, rather how we're going to approach it, or rather not approach it in such a divisive way. And I get that people have misgivings about some of the different approaches to education, and that's got to be a part of that candid conversation. I think we can do so with in a mature way and have a better result. So that's a big deal to me too. Kevin?
I'd like to give just a little picture of perspective for you. I don't know how well you know the organization up there, but there are 400 representatives and 24 senators with a staff of 16 lawyers to write legislation, 4 lawyers to do legal research for us, and an LBO budget office that helps keep the budget numbers organized for us. That's it. We depend a lot on information that we get from people like you, from experts that we can call on, but we don't have the type of organization that the federal government, thank goodness, has. Would probably spend us all to the poorhouse. But we're limited in some of the information we get, and we have to make the decision on the information that we get. We try to get the best we can. Sometimes we don't have correct information.
I've provided, just so you know, a flow chart as to how the budget made its way or makes its way through the House. Thank you for holding that up. There's a bunch of them over on that table there. Feel free to grab one. And that gives you an idea for the complexity of the process, but it also lets you know which step in the process we occupy, and it's just one piece of the pie. So that's the budget.
Okay, and so the question is, what do we want to work on?
What are your top 2 or 3 issues that you're looking at going forward that you might need input or support on from the state perspective and from the city of Nashua perspective?
Definitely education is a high priority. There are a number of bills that we're talking about: the Common Core, Smarter Balance, PACE, charter schools, network for education opportunity. There are a number of issues that are before us, and I really do listen when you send me emails either in support or against a certain bill. I mean, there are a number of them that affect local control. I'm definitely a pro-local control advocate. I really believe that it's your decision. Fortunately, one of my bills did pass the House and the Senate, and it was SB 101, which made it your option to either adopt Common Core or not. It was a very simple bill. Education is right up there because it affects all of us on some level, especially when you taxes. If anybody here knows my history, I've always been a pro-advocate for the small guy and the person that feels like they've fallen through the cracks. And my first bill that I brought to the attention to the Senate was the FRM scandal. You know, somebody said, well, don't go up there being Don Quixote and trying to save the world. But I reached over to Senator D'Alessandro. He's the dean of the Senate. He's a Democrat. And Representative Ken Gidge and J.R. Hole. So, and John Burt. And what that means is polar opposites. And I wanted to build a bridge and a consensus. And this bill passed the Senate. But what it does is it says, listen, some people were harmed by our government. They dropped the ball. It was the Department of Banking and the Attorney General's office. And a lot of people lost their life savings. Some people even committed suicide over the scandal. And so I incorporated this bill, and I actually have the Secretary of State's help on this as well, and he's working on it. There's a split decision in the House right now, and I'm hoping it passes. But if it does pass, and if you could support on this, I would really appreciate it. If it does pass, what it says is that people that are licensed under our government, when the government says we're holding this license, and this license, it means it's good. It's fair. This is a good company. We have licensed it, and it's credible. When our government officials say that, it needs to mean something. Some people walked away with great big fat pensions and left some people out in the cold, and we're trying to hold them accountable. And I've always been a very big advocate for that. You sit in the Child and Family Law, and that has been another issue. One of the benefits of having your own TV show, and we've had one for about 3 years now, two TV shows. Gate City Chronicles lets me know what's going on in Nashua. We have an amazing city. We have amazing people in this town. We have all kinds of events going on and people helping with each other. And that's one of the nice things about having your own TV show. But I have another one called Speak Up, where people feel as though they've fallen through the cracks. And I feel that our family courts, we need to address these issues that are dealing with our family courts, because children are being used as pawns. And people are making money on our children.
It's an industry.
In our family courts. You've heard a number of testimonies in your committee. Carl, you've seen it, flat as day. And I'm just going to say, Carl is my mentor, so blame it on him.
Thanks.
But what we're seeing is that there's an industry that is unaccountable. A few years back, when I was a state representative, I did sit on the redress committee. And we found at least 28 cases of problems with our government that were founded. They killed the committee, and those cases sit there. Nobody's doing anything about it, and so these people never got justice. They pled before the New Hampshire General Court, and nothing happened. And I'm telling you, we need to, our world isn't just the budget. If our civil rights are being violated, we need to address that. And these are some of the issues that, as a senator, I'm very concerned about. And I hope that we can address some of these issues in the future. So education, our civil rights, family courts, accountability in our government. Does that answer?
Yeah, it did. Thank you. One last point, and I understand you guys don't have staff, can't do research. Well, somebody else brought up earlier the issue about the infrastructure and the roads, and I was stunned when I heard how many bridges in New Hampshire were at risk and becoming dangerous if they weren't already so. And I want you guys to please look at and convince your other fellow folks to look at and do the numbers. I did some research myself. There's 2 studies, actually, I think I found. One was by the state of Virginia, Department of Transportation, and I think the other was Penn State, and they found that semi-trucks, one semi-truck fully loaded going across the highway will do as much damage as 2,000 cars. Mm-hmm. But I don't think the fees they pay in either diesel fuel tax or permits or any of that covers that sort of ratio. So I'm hoping you guys can take a look at the numbers and really try and find something that's equitable, because you're coming into that issue where you get electric cars like Tesla, the Prius, other vehicles that aren't going to be putting as much into the system as they are causing damage. So I do try and encourage you guys to try and find somewhere, if you can find the studies, find somebody else in another state that has gone through this similar thing. I think we need something that's equitable. I think that's something that that could help pay for our infrastructure, and not just the fact that the existing funds are being misappropriated, but that's something that's proportional to the folks that are using the road, and that's not going to do an undue burden on others subsidizing other folks. Right. I know that you guys had a lobbying group come up last time this was approached, and it was flooded with folks who drove trucks. And I understand. I've worked with a lot of folks who have driven trucks. I've worked in the industries who have truck delivering businesses. I know for a fact a lot of these businesses deliberately overload their trucks because they can get away with it, because the amount of money they make more than makes up for the fines that they pay if they get caught. Okay, so I'm encouraging you guys as lawmakers to try and do what you can to make sure that that sort of thing is proportional. And I hope you guys can continue to do the good work you guys are doing. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Kevin, what is the name of that bill that you were mentioning, that Senate bill that you were mentioning moments ago?
FRM?
Yeah.
155.
Thank you.
So we've been here a couple hours.
Almost.
Is that about it? Well, I thank you all very much for coming out here today, and we really appreciate it. Contact us if you have any needs.
We
Thank
do
you.
have sign-up sheets on either side.
The preceding program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.